Full recovery from the pandemic depends very much on a safe reopening of schools, but many public school systems heading in that direction are starting the new year with remote learning, including the one in Boston. The decision follows concerns about safety of school buildings and student transportation, concerns raised by some parents, but also by people who work in the schools, including members of the Boston Teachers Union. To explain the concerns and the search for remedies is the union's president, Jessica Tang. Thank you very much for being with us, Jessica.
Glad to be here.
Jessica, I want to start with what I think was a sort of sigh of relief when people in Boston announced the schools would begin the new year all remote. But one of the other things you noted in response to that was more work needs to be done. What's the most important part of that work?
So, we've been saying this for months, and I think that's the greatest frustration is that we knew that this fall was coming. We knew that the majority of students would be receiving some form of remote education during the school year, even though we do want to bring our highest needs students in particular back to school buildings, or not necessarily school buildings, but in-person learning and services as quickly as possible. But we knew that it would take a lot of planning, the logistics of the facilities, but also just how do you teach remotely well? What we did in the spring was everyone just trying to figure it out on their own for the most part, without any preparation, trying to learn how to teach remotely overnight without even being able to have all the materials from the classrooms, because people were asked, we were back one day and then never got back into the buildings. And so we can do it so much better. And that is the preparation that we've been asking for in terms of really ensuring that all of our teachers and educators get the training, the skills, the technology, the resources and supports they need, not just to improve high quality remote learning, teaching and learning, but also thinking about anti-racism curriculum. It's still very relevant to our district where we have majority students of color. Also thinking about social emotional wellness and health, and how do you through remote ways address social emotional learning and health, and also have anti-trauma and trauma sensitive pedagogies. So those are all examples of the type of trainings that we need and the type of development and planning that will ensure a much smoother and I think more fruitful school year.
One thing I did pick up, at least from reports about the stakeholder meetings that came before the decision about reopening, was that a lot of parents did want hybrid learning. I know that's sort of a general sentiment, but doesn't that have to be reckoned with in some way?
Yes. So again, we are not against hybrid learning. We are against the hybrid learning plan that is currently being proposed by the district. So we have actually proposed we believe, better and more thoughtful hybrid learning plan in which we bring back the students who, again, are in greatest need of in-person learning and services. And those students may actually need more than 2 days. They may need 4 days. They may need 5 days, or some students may only need 1 day of in-person services. But we've got to be more flexible and more creative also in thinking about how we support all students, and think also about using facilities that are beyond our school buildings, because that's the number one concern right now is the facilities. We are working in school buildings that for too long have had deferred maintenance, that don't have working windows, that we have school buildings where half of them don't even have windows at all, or only one working window. And when air ventilation and air quality is one of the number one concerns in terms of exposure to the virus, then you can imagine why there's a lot of anxiety about going back into buildings. But if we were to find better facilities and better places where we knew they were safe, I think a lot more people would be feeling a little less anxiety about going back into our buildings.
But right now, parents are being surveyed on what they want, which option, either all remote or hybrid. Do you think they know enough about what they're getting into, especially when it concerns the condition of a building, to really make a decision?
I don't think so at this point. I don't think anyone has the information they need to really feel that the buildings have been upgraded and are in a condition in which people can safely be in them. And we've also asked the district, you need to do assessments of not just the school buildings and the rooms, but also capacity. So for every room that is functional, how many students can safely fit in there, and or people really, because oftentimes we have teams of adults working in classrooms too. But I also do think that the survey results are not necessarily reflective of what is really going to happen, because we've heard many reports. In fact, I've seen screenshots where BPS has indicated that you should choose hybrid if you think at some point you want to go hybrid, because it's easier to pick hybrid and go to remote than to pick remote and go back to hybrid. And I also think you have to look more closely at who is choosing hybrid. If you look at the disaggregated results, it's disproportionately white families that have requested hybrid, whereas a lot of the Black and Latino, Latinx families and Asian families have requested remote at higher rates, which I think shows a little bit of, in a majority students of color district, that the results are not across the board the same.
Well, part of any plan is for what happens should a student get infected. And part of the plan in Boston is to have home health screenings where parents check their kids before they leave the house. But beyond that, what should there be to monitor students, especially, I guess, students who might not have symptoms?
Right. Well, I mean, this is what we've read from epidemiologists, is that you need rapid testing, and the home health screening is not going to be sufficient, especially if a lot of children are asymptomatic. And so we are absolutely advocating for frequent testing, both for students and for educators. If colleges are expecting students to do that, we certainly think that public elementary schools and high schools should be doing that as well. And we can't ensure safety 100% in any situation. So every possible tool that we can have to try to mitigate and create safer conditions is something I think that needs to be discussed and put into place before anyone's going back in person. And we just haven't had those assurances yet.
I want to ask about school personnel being in the buildings. If you're starting all remote, I would think a lot of them could do that work from another location, but there are mandates, whether from the state or the city. What about those?
We have a lot of concerns about that. The expectation that even if we are teaching remotely or having professional development, that teachers should report to school buildings absolutely makes no sense to us. It's unnecessarily, literally asking thousands of teachers from lots of different communities, many communities, including East Boston and neighboring districts or towns that have very high rates. East Boston's at over 11% right now. And how does it make sense to unnecessarily have folks coming into these neighborhoods where we know that there are high rates of COVID, and having folks leave those communities to other buildings and risk exposure for thousands of people literally across the city? And people are taking public transportation. And there is no research or evidence that having people attend professional development in school buildings or teaching remotely from their empty classrooms where they have to wear masks is actually beneficial to students or to teaching and learning. And so it absolutely does not make any sense that this would be an expectation. And we don't think it should be.
I want to ask you about the remote learning option, because even if there's this progression to hybrid, there's still going to be a lot of remote learning that's required. There were a lot of problems with that, but I've also heard from a parent that there's at least one school in the city, maybe more than one, where it worked really well. I think a lot of that is the credit of teachers. What's to be learned from how to make this work?
That's exactly what we've been doing for the last few weeks, actually. In August, teachers come back for professional development, and we had over 1,000 teachers last week participate in professional development specifically on this topic of what are the best practices for remote learning. And what we do know is that you can't try to replicate the in-person school day. So if you have all 31 students in front of you every single day for the same hours and times that you'd have as a schedule in school, it's actually not a good use of your time. Instead, actually, remote learning, there's a lot of ways in which you can have more flexibility if you have pre-recorded videos and lessons, but then you have much more time for small group instruction. There's also a lot of project-based learning that you can do. And there's a lot more tools and technology and platforms now we know how to use to engage students. And what we shouldn't be doing, though, is expecting students to be sitting in front of a screen for 6.5 hours a day, going from period to period. And that actually disengages students. So again, there are a lot of best practices that our educators have been leading in professional development and sharing about what does work.
What about connecting with families who might need a little more help, maybe a lot of more help in navigating remote learning and doing it in certain languages too?
Sure. So actually, that's been in our proposals. We absolutely believe that there needs to be multilingual tech support and help. Part of the reason we believed in the delay for the school start was because we need to assess where are our families with their basic needs, including technology and access to Wi-Fi, et cetera, and ensuring that they have everything they need in place. Again, the spring was a scramble. Our teachers were out delivering computers and working with the district, over 30,000 laptops being delivered. Well, we don't have to rush this time. We can have a methodical and well thought out plan for how to ensure that everyone has the technology and it's one-to-one, so that you don't have one family sharing, 3 students and one computer. And so, yeah, those are absolutely all things that need to be considered and put in place sooner rather than later.
Briefly, what about students with high needs and making their education inclusive? What can be done about that?
Yeah. So again, this is something we've been advocating for months now, is saying we need to identify the schools and facilities in which it is safer for folks to come in first. And if that means, if the Elliott School has a nicer school building and it's newer and has the air quality and all of the functions that create a safer environment, then that should be a place where not just Elliott students can go, but other students with high needs may be able to go to get their assessments, which we know are backlogged, and also identify those places where those services can be met if their child's homeschool is not yet in the condition in which people can go there. And so that's what we've said. We need to look creatively at our partners, whether it be private or colleges or universities that are not using their classrooms or spaces. And if that means going outside of our school buildings to ensure that our highest need students are in safe places where they can get the services they need, then that's what we need to do. And we need to do it equitably. It cannot be just, based on if your school is open, then you get services, whereas another school where they may not have as nice facilities wouldn't be able to go in and get services. That's not equitable at all.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to share that.
You're welcome.
Jessica Tang, President of the Boston Teachers Union. And we'll have more news in just a moment.